When we talk about corporate crime, what we're really talking about is financial misconduct, impropriety, and compliance breaches. Our key message to clients right now, as of summer 2025, is around the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act, or ECTA as we're calling it. And in particular, a new offence which comes into force on the 1st of September 2025 for failing to prevent fraud. ECTA represents the biggest shake-up to economic crime and corporate crime that I've known in the course of my career. And what it really means is that corporates can now be held liable for the offences committed by its staff and its senior managers.
Essentially, the new offence of failure to prevent fraud is a strict liability offence. So you may be familiar with ones that work similarly, like under the Health and Safety Act or under the Bribery Act, where essentially a company doesn't need to have intended or actively meant that their employees go out and commit a crime, but it's enough that they fail to prevent it from happening. Practically what this means is if you are a large organisation, which means that you have over £36 million turnover a year and or more than £18 million on your balance sheet and or 250 employees, you, from September, could be potentially liable for the actions of what we call associated persons. Associated persons are basically anybody, whether that's an employee or a consultant or even a third-party company that provides services for or on behalf of your business. If they go out and they commit a fraud, indirectly or directly to benefit your business, and you did not have reasonable procedures in place to prevent that from happening, then your company can be found directly liable for that fraud. 40% of all crime in England and Wales is fraud. As a company, you can be subject to an unlimited fine. So in our experience from the Bribery Act, we've seen fines up into the hundreds of millions for very severe cases. So for example, if you're running a care home business and you have lots of employees, for example, going in and providing caring services to people, typically vulnerable people, in their homes, you could, for example, overinflate the hours that you've spent delivering care in their homes. That would indirectly obviously benefit the care home business because you'd be billing for having spent more time than you actually did on the premises. The benefit for the employee, I suppose, is maybe they're getting paid for higher hours. That's obviously something that at the high level within the company, at the exec level, at the board level, there might not even be any awareness that that was happening on the ground where those care services are actually being delivered. But if that gets found to have happened, and again, there weren't those reasonable procedures in place to stop that from happening, it won't matter that the company didn't know that it was occurring, that it was too far below anybody to have any direct knowledge of it. It'll be enough that it happened and they didn't do enough to stop it.
So the key message to businesses really is that now is the time to get your house in order and make sure that you're prepared for the new offence coming in. You may have heard that the failure to prevent fraud offence only relates to large companies. And whilst that is true, it will be incumbent on smaller companies that provide services to those large companies to ensure that they have reasonable procedures in place. And what we're starting to see is that companies are being asked whether or not they have those policies in place before they're engaged to start work.
The first thing to realise, if you're a smaller company which represents or provides consultancy services or something like that to a larger company, then you could be caught as an associated person under the legislation. In those circumstances, it's important to remain competitive, retain the business by taking action now. And by that I mean looking at your own due diligence procedures, ensuring that there are sufficient clauses in contracts with employees, associated persons and with your own suppliers. The second thing businesses can do is to be familiar with the Home Office guidance on the failure to prevent fraud legislation. It builds upon the same 6 core principles and the framework to meet reasonable procedure standards as the anti-bribery legislation from nearly 15 years ago, and it builds on the principles of top-level commitments, risk assessments, proportionate procedures, communications including training, monitoring and reviewing, and due diligence. Take the opportunity now to do a risk assessment and determine the scope of that risk assessment before, in terms of the offences the risk assessment takes in, the economic crime offences such as bribery and fraud are very similar. So there's no need to repeat work unnecessarily, and look at the scope of the organisation that needs to be caught. Look at the areas of vulnerability in relation to fraud risk in your organisation, and determine and assess whether those procedures that you have, policies and training are adequate. And when you're doing that assessment, don't just think of it in terms of financial implications, also think of it in terms of reputational costs and the cost of losing key employees because your business is caught up in a fraud.
So you might now be thinking, well, how do I start this, or where do I go from here? And that's where Capital Law can help you. Our team is made up of 3 former officers from the Serious Fraud Office. We've got extensive experience in this landscape. Our team also has experience of providing compliance advice to FTSE 500 companies, running huge, extensive, complex investigations involving large data sets in multiple jurisdictions, and providing robust defences to individuals and companies who come under the scrutiny of regulators and law enforcement. If you want to find out more about how we can help, please just get in contact with us. We'll be happy to answer any queries that you have. Additionally, we'll be holding 2 breakfast briefings in September, one in Cardiff on the 10th and one in London on the 17th. And this is an opportunity for us to tell you a bit more about the offence of failing to prevent fraud and what you and your business can do to protect yourselves.